Greetings, YouTube. I was poking around on the Big Purple the other day in RPGNet, and there was a thread about how to nerf the wizard so that they don't do everything in a party better than the party members themselves. Now, this particular argument has been kicking around for as long as D&D has existed. Whenever it finally was a fully defined list of spells, I can remember back in first edition, people were still saying, well, wizards can do everything. And back then, the definitions on spells were much squishier, and people were able to push the boundaries of what spells could do farther than they could under 3.5 or under Pathfinder first edition. Still haven't looked at second edition. Please forgive me. I've been poking around at Stars Without Number just because I wanted to. And I can completely understand that. You want every character to have unique skills. The problem is that there's a couple of different ways of handling the situation when you don't have every role filled. Now, this may be because you have no one in the party that wants to play X. So how do the roles that would be played by character type X get supported in the game? Because the system is designed around the idea that the party will have access to the skills of class X that isn't there. Now, I've seen this in video games where every character has to become very good at everything because it's a single-player game. Skyrim and Fallout 4 are the two examples I think that are the most egregious at this because, for example, everyone has to be good at block picking. Now, I'm pretty good at crafting things, okay? I'm pretty good at it. I made this thing not long ago. It's a nice little fast mace. I got two of them. I made a pair intentionally so you could use them together. I don't know anything about locks. I don't. I mean, no, it's not anything. I watch the lock picking lawyer like any smart person does because he's very entertaining. But I don't know much about how to pick them myself, other than very loosely and theoretically. I know enough to know that the images shown in both Skyrim and in Fallout 4, particularly Fallout 4, make no sense whatsoever. You don't use a screwdriver to pick a lock. But if I were to want to open a lock, I would use the skills I acquired making this. I'd use an angle grinder. Lock's going to go away. I can guarantee it. I'll have access to everything inside. But that is not supported in the game. Everybody has to pick the locks the way the game says you have to pick the locks. And now we're ignoring the fact that it becomes a mini game that frustrates most people anyway. But there have been mods that let you find other ways of picking the locks. For example, spells. That's a perfect example. So if you're playing a spellcaster, boom, you cast a spell, lock comes open. It makes absolute sense. I've seen another one where you can take your lock and you go swish, and you Hulk it open. Again, makes perfect sense. You're playing a barbarian dude that, could be using a Tetsubo or a Maul. Makes perfect sense that you decide you're going to use the, percussive method of lock opening. So those systems had to be modded externally to allow people to have more options. So what do you do in a tabletop role-playing game when you don't have every role covered? One of the examples I have is that we had a game where there were no clerics in it at the time. There was a fighter, a thief, and a spellcaster. And what do you need? What do you do for healing? And they were low level enough that they did not have ready access to just generic potions. Or at the time, it was second edition. Yeah, I think it was second edition. So I guess, and the rogue wasn't high enough level to trick scrolls into allowing them to read it. It was kind of a weird thing. It was before you had no magic item. Was it no magic? No, it wasn't no magic. It was use magic item, use magical device or something like that, which is 3rd edition, and which you could then trick a magic item into functioning for you, even though you were not of the appropriate class or skill level to use it. You could just trick the item. I always thought that was kind of weird, but always almost made it sound like the items themselves were partly sentient. Maybe they are. So I had to throw in like herbal medications for them to use and things like that, which meant that those things existed when they did get a cleric. So now the cleric has their role undermined by the fact that I had to come up with a way of filling that role when that role was not filled by a player character. So now they have to figure out, so now they're feeling like their class is less special. Their power level is being reduced because the players in the group have an option that is not as good as theirs, but still available and over the counter. So that's an issue. And of course, the wizard is the most egregious example, is because so many of the wizard spells can make them very powerful. You knock spell, boom, doors open. Invisibility, sneak right on through. And especially if you're wearing the right kind of, say for like boots of Elvenkind or something like that, so it's muffling your sound, or you've got a high sneak score, and then you can have a high sneak score in this game. You just, I think, saying you can't. So a wizard could tune themselves, or a gaseous form spell, or etherealness. All of these will let a wizard to do things that a rogue can only dream of. And that takes some of the sparkle away from the rogue class now, doesn't it? Yeah, they get backstabbing and stuff, which is nice. But wizards can do high-powered stuff against people silently as well. Now, one of the things I noticed when I did a recent reread of the game Radiance, and I reread the game because I wanted to look at their expansion kit, which I had purchased, and it's been long enough I needed to read Radiance to get a feel for it before I read their expansion to decide, how does this stand up, in both in comparison and as in a standalone product kind of thing, is that I'm reading every single class in the game, which means a lot. Okay, I'll admit, some of the evil classes I kind of skimmed. But a lot of these abilities are the exact same from class to class to class. They have exactly the same name. They do exactly the same thing. Occasionally there'll be a slightly more powerful version or less powerful version from one class to another. So like this class can't do this thing quite as well as the other class can, but it still can have access to that kind of thing. Of course, it also costs less to purchase because it's a less powerful version. But you see the patterns, and you see how there is overlap always between certain classes, because there is overlap between how those classes function in the real world. So there's always going to be some of that. And I admit that in D&D, especially in 3.5 and in Pathfinder 1st Edition, wizards really can do a whole lot of stuff. They really can cover a lot of roles. You could, in theory, have a party of nothing but wizards and probably do a pretty good job of surviving once you got past like 3rd level. First couple of levels are probably going to be rough. So what do you do about it? And I'm asking you, what do you do about it? When I had the example I gave you with the no cleric and we had a cleric, I just felt bad at the time because I'm like, I tried to give that person role-playing things to do, and they did. And I kind of emphasized their other characteristics other than healing, but there was no denying that their main role as a cleric was often undermined by the non-magical, pre-alchemical sources. This is before there was an alchemy structure really in the game that like 3.3 3rd edition brought to the table. Literally brought to the table, tabletop role-playing game. So what do you do? How do you prevent the wizard from being the big bad wolf on the block? Now, Radiance does it by making every class have a far lower level of abilities. So wizards can do cool things, but they're really nerfed. If you want to nerf a wizard, look at Radiance. Radiance nerfs wizards. They have exactly the same number of abilities as everybody else, and their number of abilities is much smaller. There's no 400 spell list available to them. They got 2 pages of abilities like everybody in their class. And yeah, they can modify them a little bit, like energy types and things like that, or push extra effort by adding more mana points into something. But yeah, they're much more limited, which means they're much less likely to stealing the spotlight from other characters. So, what do? There are times you have to give those those skills to more than one class because there's no one else to cover them. But then when there is, they've had some of their thunder stolen. And how do we keep the powerful classes like wizards from stealing everybody's thunder? What do?